Classical Music Mysteries. You are sitting in an opera house. The performance is a Mozart opera. The overture has just begun. And yet, the person sitting right next to you opens a picnic basket. They start stuffing their face with meat. From the row behind you, a loud voice echoes out, "Hey, we're out of wine, bring us some more." Across the aisle, a group of men has spread out a deck of cards. They're gambling with coins and getting completely carried away. And above all else, the house lights are completely on. Most of the audience is paying zero attention to the stage. Unless their favorite singer is on, they're chatting loudly. It sounds more like a busy marketplace than a theater. If this happened today, an usher would rush over immediately. You'd be kicked out. People would film it, and it would spark outrage on social media. They'd call it terrible manners or an insult to the music. But what if this was La Scala in Milan during the 18th century, or a theater in Venice? In that setting, the only person acting weird would be you, sitting quietly and staring straight ahead. We all know the golden rule of classical concerts: sit quietly and listen to the music without saying a word. But what if this completely obvious rule is actually a recent invention? What if it only applies to a tiny slice of history? Today, we are going to talk about the reality of opera houses. It's a story you won't find in textbooks. Opera houses are seen as sacred temples of art today, but in the past, they were as free as a rock concert, as loud as a local pub, and deeply, wonderfully human. Chapter 1: The Modern Disease of Silence. When we go to a concert today, we follow invisible rules. You cannot make a sound during the performance. Even clearing your throat makes you feel guilty. You must never clap at the wrong time. This forced silence might actually be pushing people away from classical music. But let's look back 200 or even 250 years ago. A completely different scene unfolds. In early Europe, the theater was not a place to quietly appreciate art. It was the ultimate social hub of the city. It was a place for business deals, a casino, and a spot to meet new people. For people back then, theatrical music was premium entertainment. It livened up their social gatherings. Sometimes it was literally just background music. They didn't disrespect the music. They just interacted with it in a completely different way than we do today. So how exactly did those audiences spend their time? Let's take a closer look at the reality. Chapter 2: Box Seats, Real Estate, and a Second Living Room. First, let's look at the structure of the theater itself. From the 18th century to the early 19th century, opera houses looked very different. This was especially true in Italy and across Europe. They didn't have the tiered, stadium-style seating facing the stage that we see today. You might have seen movies featuring old theaters. They have walls completely covered in tiny, stacked rooms, looking almost like a honeycomb. Those are the box seats. Today, you simply buy a ticket and sit in your assigned seat. But things worked differently back then. In Italian opera houses especially, nobles and the wealthy didn't just rent these box seats. They owned them. It was treated more like real estate. They secured these seats through annual contracts or inherited them across generations. They even carried physical keys to their box seats, just like their front door keys. And because it was their own private room, they could decorate it however they liked. They didn't use the stiff theater chairs. Instead, they brought in comfortable sofas from home. They hung their favorite paintings and mirrors on the walls. In winter, they even brought in braziers and stoves to keep their feet warm. In short, a box seat wasn't just a place to sit. It was practically their living room, transported directly into the theater. So what did they actually do in there? They listened to the music, of course, but the room's role as a social space was far more important. Even while the performance was happening, people would freely wander between different box seats. "Greetings, Marquis. How was the hunt yesterday? Countess, your dress is absolutely stunning." Conversations like this were perfectly normal. Nobody cared if the orchestra was playing right in front of them. The sounds of knocking doors, laughter, and cheerful greetings echoed constantly throughout the theater. Box seats also had curtains in the front. If you closed them, the room became completely private from the outside. Inside, politicians held secret meetings. Lovers engaged in poorly kept secret affairs. The French author Stendhal wrote about this in his Italian travelogues. He noted that the theater was the best place for people to relax and enjoy a good conversation. For them, going to the theater wasn't about quietly listening to art, it was simply about meeting up with your usual social circle. Chapter 3: The Fever of Food and Gambling. Now, you can't have a proper social event without food. Today, concert halls constantly remind you that eating and drinking are strictly prohibited. Back then, it was the exact opposite. For the owners of the box seats, eating a delicious dinner during the performance was completely normal. Waiters would bring in cold meats, pastries, fresh fruit, and wine. The patrons happily enjoyed their meals. Delicious aromas filled the air, accompanied by the constant clinking of plates and silverware. Picture the stage. A tragic heroine is singing a sorrowful aria about losing her true love. Meanwhile, right above her, a knife is loudly sawing through a piece of meat. A cheerful voice floats down saying, "This sauce is absolutely exquisite." On top of that, vendors were constantly roaming the theater aisles. Their shouting and pedaling simply blended right into the music. And there was another intense energy dominating the theater. That energy was gambling. In Italian theaters, especially in Venice and Naples, gambling and music were a packaged deal. Some theaters had dedicated gambling salons right in the lobby, but it was also completely normal to see people playing cards or rolling dice right inside their box seats. Operas feature a singing style called recitative. These are spoken word sections designed to move the plot forward. They lack major musical buildups. Because of this, most audiences at the time found them completely boring. So they used this time to focus on their card games, eager to get a few hands in. But the moment an aria began, everything changed. When their favorite singers stepped up to show off incredible vocal skills, they dropped their cards, they cheered and shouted "Bravo!" And the moment the song ended, they went straight back to gambling. Think of it like a modern sports bar. You're watching the game, drinking with friends, and occasionally playing a game on your phone. For them, music was simply an entertainment tool to set the mood. It was never something that required sitting up straight and listening in silence. Chapter 4: Not to see, but to be seen. At this point, a question comes to mind. If everyone was doing whatever they wanted, didn't they care about what others thought? The truth is, drawing the attention of others was exactly why they went to the theater in the first place. Dimming the house lights during a performance didn't become standard until the late 19th century. Before then, the light stayed on the entire time. Because it was brightly lit, everything was visible to everyone. You could see exactly who was there. You could see who they were with and exactly what they were wearing. Nobles would dress up in the latest fashions, cover themselves in sparkling jewels, and take their box seats. They brought opera glasses, but not just to watch the singers. They used them just as eagerly to spy on the people sitting across from them. Look over there, he brought his mistress today. Wait, isn't that the exact same necklace she wore last week? This kind of juicy gossip was the real entertainment. It was way more interesting than the plot of the opera itself. Meanwhile, the ground floor pit was completely packed. This area was mostly filled with male audience members who bought cheaper tickets. Until the early 19th century, there were no chairs down here. It was standing room only. These men would look up at the nobles in the box seats and heckle them. Sometimes they would even scream as hot wax and lamp oil dripped down onto them from the chandeliers above. The energy in the pit was absolutely wild. If they didn't like a singer, they booed without mercy. If they loved a performance, they demanded endless encores. Sometimes they forced a singer to repeat the same aria 3 or 4 times. This could delay the opera by over an hour. The theater smelled of soot from candles and lamps. It smelled of heavy perfumes and roasted food. All of this mixed with the sweat and body heat of the crowd. The early theater was a melting pot of chaotic energy that overwhelmed your eyes, ears, and nose. Chapter 5: The Rise of Charisma and the Rule of Silence. So, how did this incredibly free environment turn into the silent spaces we know today? It was driven by a series of revolutionary changes throughout the 19th century. First came a technological revolution. Gas lighting and eventually electric lighting were introduced. This finally made it possible to control the lighting in the seating area. Theaters could now plunge the audience into darkness and brilliantly illuminate only the stage. This staging technique completely changed the experience. It became much harder for the audience to see each other. As a result, their eyes and minds were forced toward the stage and the music. The theater's role as a bustling social club during performances slowly faded away. Next came a revolution in the minds of the musicians themselves. The German composer Richard Wagner was a key figure who championed this shift. In his own festival theater, he hid the orchestra in a pit completely out of the audience's view. He also kept the seating area incredibly dark. He wanted to remove the physical reality of the musicians from sight. He wanted to plunge his audience into a pure, undistracted world of story and music. Wagner sought to elevate music. He wanted to change it from everyday entertainment into an almost religious, artistic experience. We also saw the rise of strict, commanding musicians like conductors Gustav Mahler and Arturo Toscanini. They absolutely refused to tolerate latecomers. They strictly banned talking during the performance. Using their immense authority, they enforced absolute discipline in the concert hall. Listen to my music. I will not tolerate chatter. This powerful artistic ego was thrust right into the faces of the audience. Finally, there was a major change in social structure. The aristocracy began to decline. In their place, the rising middle class became the main audience of the theater. Unlike the nobles, they didn't own box seats to use as private social salons. They were people who bought tickets with their own hard-earned money. They came to listen to music to improve their cultural education. This new attitude of listening seriously for the sake of culture brought strict discipline to the theater. And just like that, the chatting and dining disappeared. It gave way to the tension-filled concert halls of today, where even a single cough is frowned upon. We lost our absolute freedom in the seats, but in exchange, we gained the concentration needed to absorb every delicate note, exactly as the composer intended. Epilogue: Bringing music back into life. The history of classical music is actually a history of increasingly strict manners. You simply cannot enjoy a meal and drinks at a modern concert hall like they did in the past. Today's world has its own modern etiquette, and honestly, there is a soul-shaking emotion that can only be felt in complete silence. Thousands of people holding their breath at the exact same time, focusing entirely on a single note. It is a miraculous experience that only we in the modern era get to enjoy. But maybe you feel differently. Maybe you feel that classical music is too stiff and formal. Maybe you think you need to study it before you can enjoy it, and so you avoid the music altogether. If that sounds like you, please remember the audiences of the past. Most of them were not frowning and analyzing every single chord. They absorbed the music far more intuitively. They treated it as a completely natural part of their daily lives. If it's boring, just go to sleep. If it's fun, just shout out loud. At its core, music is deeply forgiving. It was always meant to be something that simply sits beside us in our daily lives. So why not try this at home? Grab your favorite drink and some snacks, sit in your living room, chat loudly with your friends, and put on some Mozart or Joseph Haydn. Hey, this song actually gets you pumped up. Man, this part drags on forever. Having careless, fun conversations like this might just be the best way to listen. In fact, it might be the exact same luxurious musical experience that those ancient aristocrats loved so much. Thank you for watching. If you have your own thoughts, theories, or interpretations, feel free to share them in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. See you in the next video.